It was Christmas Eve. I was 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet, staring at the tree lights reflecting on the window. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater kicking in. My parents were asleep upstairs, and the clock on the wall had just struck midnight. I wasn't supposed to be awake, but that year I had made up my mind. I was going to see him, Santa. Every kid in the neighborhood talked about him. The cookies they left by the chimney, the empty plate they found in the morning, the gifts he left behind. I believed every word of it. Why wouldn't I? It was magical. But something about that night was different. It's hard to explain now, but if you've ever felt that strange, heavy silence where everything feels off, you'd understand. The air felt colder than usual, like someone had left a window open, and the shadows in the room seemed longer, darker. Still, I stayed glued to my spot, eyes fixed on the fireplace. My little heart pounded every time the wind rattled the windows. What if he didn't show up? What if I fell asleep before I could catch a glimpse? And then I heard it. A shuffle. Quiet, deliberate. It wasn't the kind of sound you'd expect from a gust of wind or the creak of an old house settling. Came from the roof, then down the chimney. My chest tightened. He was here. I didn't move, didn't dare breathe. My excitement drowned out my fear. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment every kid dreams of. The first thing I saw was the boots. Big, heavy, black boots stepping out from the fireplace. Then the red pants, dusted with soot. My face lit up. It was really him. But when I looked up, I froze. The man standing in my living room didn't look like Santa. Sure, he had the suit, the red jacket, the white trim, but his face, it wasn't what it should have been. His beard was missing, and in its place was a jawline too sharp, too pale, too inhuman. His eyes weren't warm and jolly. They were dark, cold, and fixed right on me. He didn't say a word. He didn't move, didn't reach for the cookies I had carefully placed on the table. He just stood there, watching me. In that moment, every bit of excitement I'd felt drained away, replaced by something I hadn't expected. Fear. I wanted to run, to scream for my parents, but my body wouldn't move. I was stuck, caught between disbelief and terror. The man, or whatever he was, took one slow step toward me, and that's when I realized this wasn't Santa. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, staring at the man or thing, standing in my living room. Seconds? Minutes? Time felt warped, like it wasn't moving at all. My heart hammered in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was deciding what to do next. And then, without warning, he crouched down to my eye level. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost calculated. "Do you know the rules, kid?" he asked, his voice low and scratchy. It wasn't warm or kind. It was sharp, like it could cut through the quiet of the room. Rules? What rules? I didn't know what to say. My voice was stuck somewhere between my throat and my fear. He leaned closer, close enough that I could see every detail of his face. The pale skin, the faint scars on his jawline, the way his lips barely moved when he spoke. "You've seen me now," he continued, his tone colder than the winter night outside. "So you'll need to follow the rules." I finally managed to whisper, "What rules?" He smiled then, not a friendly smile, but one that felt wrong, like he was enjoying this. "You'll understand soon enough," he said. Then he stood up, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He placed it on the coffee table next to the cookies, tapped it once with his finger, and walked toward the fireplace. I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I sat there as he climbed back into the chimney without another word. In seconds, he was gone. The room felt emptier than before. The air was thick, heavy, as though it had absorbed everything that just happened. My hands trembled as I reached for the paper. It felt cold, almost damp, like it had been outside in the snow for hours. Unfolding it, I saw the words written in sharp, uneven handwriting. The rules. Never speak of this to anyone. Leave a gift under the tree every Christmas Eve, no matter what. If you hear knocking after midnight, do not answer the door. If you see me again, do not look at my face. I read them twice, then a third time, my mind racing. Was this a prank? Some kind of joke my parents had set up to keep me in line? But the paper didn't feel like a joke. And neither did whatever I had just seen. Rule number 3 stuck with me the most. The way it was written, bold and underlined, made my stomach turn. What kind of knocking? Who or what would be at the door after midnight? And why couldn't I answer it? A part of me wanted to crumple up the paper, to throw it into the fireplace and forget it ever existed. But another part of me, maybe the smarter part, knew this wasn't something I could ignore. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my bed with the covers pulled up to my chin, staring at the ceiling and listening for every creak, every gust of wind, every sound that could mean something. When morning finally came, I tried to act normal. I opened my presents with shaky hands, laughed at my dad's jokes, and pretended everything was fine. But inside, I was replaying the night over and over, trying to make sense of it. By the time the next Christmas Eve rolled around, I had almost convinced myself it wasn't real. Almost. I left a small gift under the tree that year just in case. Something cheap, something I could afford with my allowance. Nothing happened that night or the next, and for a while I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. But then, a few years later, the knocking started. I was 13 the first time I heard it. The knocking. It was Christmas Eve again. By then, the memory of that night had dulled slightly, pushed aside by school, friends, and the distractions of growing up. I still followed the rules, though, not because I believed them, but because breaking them felt like tempting fate. That year, I left an old toy truck under the tree. My parents didn't ask why, probably thinking it was some odd teenage sentimentality. I went to bed early, not out of excitement, but to escape the uneasiness that always crept in on Christmas Eve. First, the night was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels unnatural, where even the wind outside seems to hold its breath. And then, at 12:15 a.m., it started. 3 knocks. They were soft, almost polite, but they sent a chill through me that felt like ice sliding down my spine. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, ears straining to catch the sound again. 3 more knocks, this time louder. My brain scrambled for logic. It had to be a neighbor, someone drunk or confused. But we didn't live in a neighborhood where that kind of thing happened. Our house was at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by woods. And besides, who knocks at the door at midnight on Christmas Eve? I told myself not to panic. Rule number 3. If you hear knocking after midnight, do not answer the door. The words flashed in my mind, sharp and clear, as if the paper was still in my hands. But what if someone needed help? What if it was just a prank? My 13-year-old logic tried to reason with the situation, but my gut told me otherwise. I crept out of bed and toward the hallway. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. From the top of the stairs, I could see the front door. The knocking came again. 3 steady taps. I froze. No one was outside. At least no one I could see. Then, without warning, the door handle turned. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't jiggle or twist like someone fumbling. It turned smoothly, deliberately, like someone on the other side knew I was watching. I ducked behind the banister, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The handle stopped turning, and for a moment, there was nothing. just silence. I thought it was over. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow. It passed across the frosted glass of the door, tall and unnaturally thin. It didn't look like anyone I knew. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself, "Don't look, don't look, don't look." The knocking stopped after what felt like an eternity, but the air in the house didn't feel right. It was as if something had slipped inside, unseen, leaving an invisible weight in its wake. I spent the rest of the night under my covers, clutching my flashlight like it was some kind of weapon. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found the toy truck sitting on the porch. It wasn't in the spot I'd left it under the tree, and it was covered in frost, as if it had been outside all night. I didn't tell my parents. How could I explain something I didn't even understand? I just shoved the truck into the back of my closet and tried to forget about it. Over the next few years, I followed the rules more carefully. I never missed a Christmas Eve gift under the tree, and I always made sure to stay in my room after midnight. But strange things kept happening. Some nights, I'd wake up to faint whispers, so soft I couldn't make out the words. Other times, I'd find things moved around the house. Little things like a chair slightly out of place or a window unlocked when I knew I'd shut it. By the time I was 17, the fear had turned into a dull, constant anxiety. The rules weren't just suggestions anymore, they were survival. And then, one Christmas, I broke one. I was 18 when it happened, the year I broke a rule. It wasn't on purpose. I hadn't gotten careless, and I wasn't trying to prove anything. But sometimes things just happen. That Christmas Eve, everything started the same as usual. I placed a small gift under the tree, a keychain I'd picked up at the mall, and locked my bedroom door after midnight. By then, the rules had become second nature, as routine as brushing my teeth. But that night felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not in the way you feel when someone's standing behind you, but something deeper, like the house itself had eyes. At 12:17 a.m., I heard it. The knocking. 3 sharp taps at the front door, just like before. I froze, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Rule number 3 echoed in my mind. Do not answer the door. I stayed perfectly still, waiting for it to stop. But then, for the first time, it didn't. Instead, the knocking moved. 3 knocks on the front door, then 3 on the back door. Then the sound traveled to the window at the end of the hall. It was slow, methodical, as if it knew exactly where I was. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to move, but I couldn't stay there either. Quietly, I slid out of bed and tiptoed to the closet, pulling the door open just enough to slip inside. I sat in the dark, knees to my chest, listening as the knocking continued to circle the house. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting each knock, trying to block out the sound. But then the knocking stopped, and that's when I heard the voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, cutting through the silence like a blade. Alex, hearing my name spoken in that tone. Cold, detached, and completely unfamiliar, sent chills down my spine. I wanted to believe it was a trick, that my mind was playing games with me. But then it came again, closer this time. Alex, I know you're here. The closet suddenly felt too small, too exposed. I wanted to scream, to bolt out the door, but I forced myself to stay quiet. I followed the rules up until now. I just had to hold on. But then my phone buzzed. The vibration was low, but in the suffocating silence of the closet, it might as well have been an alarm. I grabbed it quickly, fumbling to silence it, but the damage was done. The voice outside the closet grew sharper. There you are. Panicked. My hands were shaking as I tried to think of what to do. The voice was just outside the door now, so close I could hear its breath. The doorknob rattled, and my heart stopped. Then, without thinking, I broke rule number 4. I looked. The slats of the closet door were just wide enough for me to see through, and for a moment, I wished I hadn't. It wasn't human. The thing outside the door was wearing the same red suit, but its face, it wasn't a face anymore. The features were stretched, distorted, like someone had tried to sculpt it from wax and then melted it. Its eyes were black voids, and its smile, that awful crooked smile, was too wide, too sharp. My breath hitched, and its head snapped toward me, those black eyes locking on mine. "I told you not to look," it said, its voice dripping with something between disappointment and anger. The closet door flung open with a force that knocked me backward. I scrambled to my feet, barely avoiding its grasp as I bolted out of the room. I ran down the hallway, my bare feet slamming against the wooden floor. The house felt like a maze, every shadow darker than it should have been, every corner hiding something worse. Behind me, I could hear it moving. Its footsteps weren't loud, but they were steady, deliberate. "Come back," it called, its voice echoing unnaturally through the house. "You broke the rule. Now you're mine." I didn't stop. My legs burned as I sprinted down the stairs, skidding to a stop in the living room. My eyes darted to the fireplace, the same place I'd seen it first all those years ago. For a second, I considered hiding there, but something told me it wouldn't work. This thing, whatever it was, knew too much. I turned toward the door instead. It wasn't the smartest idea, but it was the only one I had. As I reached for the handle, I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder. It was like ice, and the moment it touched me, my body froze. "I warned you," it whispered, leaning so close I could feel its breath against my neck. "You should have followed the rules." Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I turned and swung my arm blindly, managing to wrench free. I didn't look at its face again. I couldn't, but I felt its presence looming as I yanked the door open and stumbled outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. But then I realized the knocking had stopped, and the silence was worse. I left the house that night, but nothing felt the same. The cold, the silence, the weight of everything I had just lived through, they all followed me, clinging to my every step. I didn't go back inside. I didn't want to. I'd seen too much, and somehow, I knew if I crossed that threshold again, there'd be no escaping it. The rules had been broken, and the price had been paid. But as I stood outside in the dark, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I could still feel its presence, the thing I had faced in the house, lingering in the air, just out of reach. It was waiting, watching like it always had. I had survived, yes, but I wasn't unscathed. The days that followed were the hardest. I tried to return to normal, but it wasn't possible. The world felt hollow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that every dark corner was hiding something just beyond my sight. I tried talking to people about what happened, but no one understood. No one believed me. I was the one who had broken the rules. I was the one who had brought it all on myself. But how could I explain the feeling of being hunted? The eyes that never stopped watching, even in broad daylight. To this day, I still hear the footsteps sometimes. Not in the physical world, but in my mind. Soft, steady, always just behind me, as if whatever it was is still trying to catch up. I've changed my phone number, my address, my routine. I moved to a new city, thinking that would be enough to escape. But I was wrong. There's something that follows you when you break the rules, something that never truly lets go. And now, no matter where I am, I feel it again. That heavy, suffocating sensation that someone is watching. I thought I needed that job. I thought I needed the money, the stability, the chance to prove myself. But now I'd give anything to forget it. The house, the rules, the shadow that whispered my name. I never went back, but in a way I never left, and I'm not sure I ever will. Subscribe for more horror stories every day.